The saloon door swung wide as Luke Morrison stumbled through, his spurs jangling against the weathered floorboards. The acrid smell of tobacco smoke and cheap whiskey hung thick in the air, mixing with the sour stench of unwashed bodies. It was past midnight in Cheyenne Creek, Wyoming territory, and the Golden Horseshoe Saloon was still alive with the sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter. Luke's blue eyes, usually sharp as a hawk's, were glazed over with drink. At 28, he cut a fine figure even in his intoxicated state, tall and lean, with a sun-weathered skin that spoke of countless days under the harsh western sun. His dark hair hung loose beneath his battered Stetson, and his shirt was stained with trail dust and whiskey. "Morrison," bellowed Jake Hartley from the poker table in the corner. "Get yourself over here, boy. We need fresh money in this game." Luke swayed slightly, gripping the bar for support. He'd been drinking since sunset, trying to drown the loneliness that seemed to follow him like his own shadow. Despite his reputation as one of the best bronc busters in the territory, despite the respect he commanded among other cowboys, the emptiness inside him remained. I'm coming," Luke slurred, pushing off from the bar. He fumbled in his vest pocket, pulling out his last $20, his entire month's wages from the Patterson Ranch. The poker table was surrounded by familiar faces. Jake Hartley, a cattle baron with more money than sense; Tom Snake Eye Sullivan, a professional gambler with slicked-back hair and cold gray eyes; and Samuel Blackwood, the town's banker who enjoyed slumming with the working folk when his wife wasn't watching. "Deal me in," Luke said, dropping heavily into the empty chair. Snake Eye's thin lips curved into a predatory smile. Well, Luke Morrison gracing us with his presence. "You sure you can see the cards straight, cowboy?" "I can see well enough to take your money," Luke shot back, though his words ran together slightly. The game began, and for a while, Luke's luck held. The pile of coins and bills in front of him grew steadily. The whiskey made him bold, reckless. He raised when he should have folded, bluffed when he should have played it safe. But somehow, the cards kept falling his way. "Seems Lady Luck's taken a shine to you tonight," Blackwood observed, mopping his sweaty forehead with a silk handkerchief. Luke grinned crookedly. "About time she paid me some mind." But as the night wore on and the whiskey bottle emptied, Luke's fortune began to turn. His pile dwindled, then disappeared entirely. By 3 in the morning, he was down to his saddle, his rifle, and his horse. "I'm out," he said, starting to push back from the table. "Now hold on there," Snake Eye said smoothly. "A man like you doesn't just walk away from the table." "Not when he's been winning all night. Tell you what, I'll spot you $100 for one more hand. Winner takes all." Luke knew he should leave. Every instinct honed by years of survival on the frontier screamed at him to walk away. But the whiskey had made him stupid, and his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of these men. "What's the catch?" he asked suspiciously. Snake Eye's smile widened. "No catch, just a little. Condition: if you lose, you do whatever I say. One thing, no questions asked." Jake Hartley chuckled. "Better be careful. Morrison, Snake Eye's got a twisted sense of humor." "Nothing illegal," Snake Eye added, spreading his hands innocently. "Just a bit of entertainment for the good folks of Cheyenne Creek." Luke stared at the gambler through bleary eyes. $100 was more than he'd see in 3 months of hard work. If he won, he could finally save enough to buy that little spread he'd been dreaming about. "Deal," he said. The crowd in the saloon had grown. Word spreading that something interesting was happening at the poker table. Men pressed in close, breathing whiskey fumes and anticipation. Snake Eye dealt the cards with practiced ease. Luke picked up his hand. 2 pairs, kings and sevens. Not bad, not great, but not bad. The betting was fierce. Snake Eye raised, Luke called. Cards were discarded, new ones drawn. Luke kept his pairs, drawing 1 card, another 7, full house. His heart pounded as he pushed the borrowed money to the center of the table. "All in." Snake Eye studied him for a long moment, those cold gray eyes searching for any tell. Finally, he matched the bet. "Show 'em." Someone called from the crowd. Luke laid down his cards triumphantly. Full house, 7s over kings. For a moment, silence fell over the saloon. Then Snake Eye began to laugh, a sound like grinding glass. Well, well, well. The gambler laid down his own cards one by one. 4 queens. Looks like you lose, cowboy. The blood drained from Luke's face as the reality hit him. He'd lost everything, his money, his gear, and now he owed this snake whatever he demanded. Now then, Snake Eye said, lighting a cigar with deliberate slowness. About that condition. You know the widow Johnson, the colored woman who lives out by Copper Creek? Luke nodded mutely. Everyone knew Amara Johnson, the beautiful young woman whose husband had died in a mine collapse 6 months ago. She kept to herself mostly, trying to scratch out a living on the small plot her husband had left her. You're going to marry her, Snake Eye announced. The saloon erupted. Men hooted and hollered, slapping their knees at what they saw as the ultimate humiliation for a white cowboy. You can't be serious, Luke protested, suddenly feeling more sober than he had all night. Deadly serious. You gave your word, Morrison, or are you the kind of man who goes back on his word? Luke's jaw clenched. In the West, a man's word was his bond. Break it, and you might as well leave the territory entirely. She won't agree to it, he said desperately. Oh, I think she will, Blackwood interjected. You see, I hold the note on her land. Either she marries you by week's end, or I foreclose. I've already had my lawyer draw up the papers. Luke's stomach churned as he realized he'd been set up from the beginning. This wasn't just about humiliating him. There was something larger at play. Why? He asked. What's your game? Snake Eye blew smoke rings toward the ceiling. Let's just say certain parties have an interest in that land. This way, everyone gets what they want. Blackwood gets his foreclosure one way or another, and we all get the entertainment of watching Luke Morrison tied to a... He paused, savoring the moment. To someone beneath his station. The crowd laughed again, uglier this time. Luke saw the faces around him clearly now. The prejudice, the cruelty, the small-mindedness of men who needed someone to look down on to feel big. I need some air, he muttered, stumbling toward the door. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and crisp. Luke leaned against the hitching post, fighting down the urge to vomit. What had he done? In one drunken night, he'd destroyed not just his own life, but potentially that of an innocent woman. 3 days later, Luke stood in the small wooden church at the edge of town, stone-cold sober and dressed in his only clean shirt. The pews were packed with townspeople who'd come to witness what they saw as the joke of the century. The door opened, and Amara Johnson entered. Luke's breath caught. He'd seen her from a distance before, but up close, her beauty was striking. She moved with quiet dignity despite the circumstances, her head held high. She wore a simple blue dress that had been carefully mended, and her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant style. But it was her eyes that held him, deep brown, filled with intelligence and a fierce pride that no amount of hardship had dimmed. She was accompanied by Reverend Mills, who looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. As she approached the altar, Luke could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her small bouquet of wildflowers. Miss Johnson, Luke said quietly when she reached him. I'm sorry about this. Save it, she said, her voice low but firm. We both know why we're here. Let's just get this over with. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Mills rushed through the vows as if the words themselves were distasteful. When he reached the part about objections, the church erupted in laughter. No objections here, Reverend, someone called out. This is the best show we've had all year. Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. Luke felt a surge of unexpected admiration for her composure. When Reverend Mills pronounced them man and wife, the church bells rang out over Cheyenne Creek. The sound seemed to mock them, echoing across the valley like laughter. As they turned to face the congregation, Luke caught Amara's eye. Something passed between them. Not love, Certainly, but perhaps understanding. They were both victims here, caught in a game neither had chosen to play. Luke offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. As they walked down the aisle through the jeering crowd, he leaned close and whispered, so only she could hear. Cowboy lost a bet, forced to wed a black beauty. But maybe the game's not done yet. She looked up at him sharply, searching his face for mockery, finding none. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. Together, they stepped out of the church and into the harsh Wyoming sun, bound now by law, if not by choice, facing an uncertain future in a land that seemed determined to see them fail. The wedding night arrived with a cold wind whistling through the gaps in Luke's cabin walls. The small wooden structure sat lonely on the prairie, 5 miles from town, surrounded by nothing but sagebrush and distant mountains. Luke had built it himself 3 years ago, never imagining he'd bring a bride here under such circumstances. Amara stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by moonlight. She hadn't spoken during the wagon ride from town, maintaining a dignified silence that made Luke more uncomfortable than any angry words could have. "It's not much," Luke said, lighting a kerosene lamp. The yellow glow revealed the sparse interior, a bed in one corner, a pot-bellied stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding a few dishes and supplies. "I've seen worse," Amara replied, stepping inside. She set down her small carpet bag, apparently all she'd been allowed to bring from her previous home. An awkward silence stretched between them. Luke busied himself stoking the fire in the stove while Amara stood near the door, arms wrapped around herself, though the night wasn't particularly cold. "Look," Luke began, turning to face her. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted. I'll sleep in the barn. You can have the cabin." "No," her voice was firm. "People will talk. They're already watching, waiting for us to fail. I won't give them more ammunition." Luke studied her in the lamplight. Even in her simple dress, there was something regal about her bearing. "Why did you agree to this?" he asked. "You could have fought Blackwood in court." A bitter smile touched her lips. "A colored widow fighting a white banker in Wyoming territory. How do you think that would have ended?" "Mr. Morrison?" He had no answer for that. They both knew the truth of it. Luke gestured uncomfortably toward the bed. "You take it. I'll make a pallet by the stove." "Thank you," she said quietly, the first soft words she'd spoken to him. As Luke spread out blankets on the floor, Amara unpacked her few belongings. He noticed how carefully she handled each item: a worn Bible, a silver hairbrush, a small framed photograph. When she pulled out a quilt, obviously handmade with intricate patterns, Luke recognized quality work. "Did you make that?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprised by the question. "My mother taught me. She was a seamstress before." She trailed off. "It's fine work," Luke said honestly. "My ma used to quilt. Never seen patterns quite like those, though." "They're from my mother's mother," Amara said, running her hand over the fabric. "African patterns, passed down and changed over time." It was the most she'd said about herself, and Luke found himself curious despite the circumstances. But the moment passed, and she turned away. Hanging the quilt carefully on a peg, they prepared for bed in awkward silence, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. Luke lay on his hard pallet, staring at the ceiling rafters, listening to the rustling as Amara settled into the bed. The cabin felt smaller than ever with 2 people in it. "Mr. Morrison?" Her voice came soft in the darkness. "Luke," he corrected. "Might as well use first names, considering." "Luke, then, I want to be clear about something. This marriage may be forced, but I won't be. That is, I don't expect." "I understand," Luke said quickly, saving them both the embarrassment. "Like I said at the church, maybe the game's not done yet. We'll figure out how to get through this with our dignity intact." "Dignity," she repeated, and he heard a world of meaning in that single word. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of their situation. Luke woke to find Amara already up, kindling the fire in the stove. She moved efficiently around the small space, and he smelled coffee brewing. "You didn't have to," he began. "I pay my way." She interrupted. "I won't be a burden." They ate a simple breakfast in silence. Biscuits Amara had made from Luke's meager supplies and the last of the bacon. Luke noticed she took only a small portion for herself. "We need supplies," he said. "And you'll need things, clothes and such. We should ride to town." Amara's shoulders tensed. "I have what I need." "No, you don't," Luke said firmly. "You're my wife now. At least in the eyes of the law. That means what's mine is yours. We're going to town, and you're going to get what you need." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to puzzle him out. "Why are you doing this?" Luke pushed back from the table. "Because it's the right thing to do. This situation isn't your fault any more than it's mine. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "if we're going to be the talk of the town anyway, might as well give them something worthwhile to gossip about." An hour later, they rode toward town on Luke's horses, him on his bay gelding, Amara on the gentler mare he used for pack work. She sat the horse well. He noticed, with natural grace. "You ride like you were born to it," he commented. My late husband, taught me," she said. "He said a woman needed to be able to take care of herself out here. Smart man. He was." The simple words carried a weight of grief that made Luke wish he hadn't brought it up. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, brown grass rippling like waves in the wind. Purple mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already touched with snow, though it was only early fall. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. "It's beautiful," Amara said suddenly. "Hard and unforgiving, but beautiful." "Most folks just see the hard part," Luke replied. "Takes a certain kind of person to see the beauty, too." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. Luke found himself stealing glances at Amara, the way she held herself in the saddle, the way the wind caught strands of her hair that had escaped from her bonnet. As they neared town, Luke's jaw tightened. He could already see people gathering on the boardwalk, pointing and whispering. News of their arrival preceded them like wildfire. "Here we go," he muttered. "Let them look," Amara said, lifting her chin. "I've faced worse than small-minded gossip." They hitched their horses in front of Henderson's general store as they climbed the steps. Martha Henderson appeared in the doorway, her pinched face a mask of false sympathy. "Why, Luke Morrison. What a surprise to see you in town so soon after your wedding." Her gaze slid to Amara with barely concealed contempt. "And you've brought your wife." "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Luke said evenly. "We need supplies." Inside the store, other customers stopped their shopping to stare. Luke ignored them, guiding Amara to the fabric section. "Pick what you need," he said. "And don't skimp. Winter's coming, and you'll need warm clothes." Amara hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention and the charity. But practicality won out, and she began examining the fabrics with a practiced eye. "That calico's poor quality," observed a familiar voice. Luke turned to see Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, wife of the rancher he worked for. Unlike the others, her expression was thoughtful rather than hostile. "The blue wool is much better. Dear, it'll last through winter and beyond." Amara looked surprised at the kindness. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "My husband speaks highly of your husband. Mrs. Morrison. Luke's one of our best hands." It was the first time anyone had called Amara by her married name with respect. Luke saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. They finished their shopping with minimal incident, though the whispers followed them like shadows. At the feed store, old Charlie Banks refused to serve them until Luke fixed him with a hard stare. At the butcher shop, they were told the best cuts were already spoken for, though Luke could see them plain as day in the case. The final stop was the bank. Luke needed to withdraw money for the supplies, and Blackwood himself emerged from his office. oily smile in place. "Ah, the happy couple," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How wonderful to see you adapting to married life. I trust there are no difficulties?" Luke's fists clenched, but Amara placed a gentle hand on his arm. The touch surprised him. It was the first time she'd voluntarily made contact. "No difficulties at all, Mr. Blackwood," she said smoothly. "In fact, we're quite content. Disappointment must be hard for you to bear." Blackwood's smile faltered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I'm sure you don't." Amara agreed pleasantly. "Good day, sir." As they loaded their purchases onto the pack horse, Luke couldn't help but grin. That was well done. Old Blackwood looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "Men like him expect people like me to cower," Amara said. "I learned long ago that dignity is sometimes the sharpest weapon we have." The ride home was quieter, both lost in thought. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly, and dust devils danced across their path. Luke noticed Amara swaying slightly in the saddle. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" he asked suddenly. She stiffened. "I manage fine. That's not what I asked." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, 3 days. Before the wedding, I sold most of my stores to pay for the dress." Luke cursed under his breath. "Why didn't you say something?" "Pride, I suppose," she admitted. "The same pride that's kept me going this far." When they reached the cabin, Luke insisted she rest while he tended the horses and unpacked the supplies. He put together a meal from their purchases. Nothing fancy, but filling. As they ate, some of the tension between them eased. "Thank you," Amara said as she finished her plate. "For today, you didn't have to stand up for me in town." "Yes, I did." Luke replied, "We might not have chosen this, but we're in it together now. The way I see it, we can either make each other miserable or find a way to make it work." She studied him across the table. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone crueler, I suppose. Most men would be furious at being forced into this situation." "I was furious," Luke admitted. "Still am, at Snake Eye and Blackwood. But not at you. You're as much a victim as I am." "Victim," she repeated thoughtfully. "I've been called many things, but I don't care for that word. It implies helplessness." "What would you prefer?" A small smile, the first real one he'd seen from her. "Survivor." That night, as they settled into their respective sleeping arrangements again, the silence felt less strained. They were still strangers bound by an unwanted marriage, but perhaps they didn't have to be enemies. "Luke?" Amara's voice came through the darkness. "Yeah? That thing you said at the church about the game not being done. What did you mean?" Luke stared up at the rafters, thinking, "I meant that Snake Eye and Blackwood might think they've won, but I don't give up that easy. This isn't over." "Good," she said softly, "because neither do I." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside the small cabin, for the first time since their forced marriage, there was a sense of possibility. They might have been pushed together by other men's greed and cruelty, but perhaps they could forge something stronger from it. The game, indeed, was not done yet. The days settled into a rhythm. Amara rose before dawn, starting the fire and making coffee while Luke tended to the horses. She took to ranch life with surprising ease, learning to milk their one cow, gather eggs from the chickens Luke had acquired, and maintain the vegetable garden that had been neglected since he'd built the cabin. "You don't have to work so hard," Luke told her one morning, watching her haul water from the well. "Idle hands are the devil's workshop," she replied, quoting the scripture with a slight smile. "Besides, I've never been one to sit still." Luke discovered she was as capable as any ranch hand. When he mentioned needing to mend the fence line, she appeared with gloves and wire. When a calf got stuck in a muddy ravine, she helped him haul it out, her dress muddy to the knees. "Where'd you learn to work like this?" he asked. impressed despite himself. "My husband's mine claim was also a small farm," she explained, wiping sweat from her brow. "When you're trying to make it with just 2 people, everyone does everything." 2 weeks into their arrangement, Luke woke to the sound of horses, not the familiar nickering of his own animals, but the thunder of multiple hooves approaching fast. He grabbed his rifle and peered out the window. 5 riders were bearing down on the cabin through the pre-dawn darkness. "Amara, get down!" he hissed, but she was already moving. Grabbing the shotgun he'd taught her to use, the riders circled the cabin, whooping and hollering. In the dim light, Luke couldn't make out faces, but he recognized the type horse thieves, taking advantage of isolated homesteads. "Morrison," one called out, "we know you got some fine horse flesh in that barn. Come on out and we might leave your cabin standing." Luke's jaw clenched. Those horses were his livelihood. Without them, he couldn't work, couldn't provide. "I'll give you one warning," Luke shouted back. "Get off my land." Laughter answered him. "Big talk from a man with a colored wife. Maybe we'll take her too, see if she's as spirited as they say." Luke saw red, but before he could respond, Amara's shotgun boomed. One of the riders yelped and clutched his shoulder. "The next one goes through your heart," she called out, her voice steady as stone. "I buried one husband already. Don't test me." The wounded man cursed viciously, but the leader of the group seemed to reassess. "Cover the barn," he ordered his men. "We'll smoke them out." Luke's mind raced. If they set fire to the barn, he'd lose everything. He had to act fast. "Can you keep them busy?" he whispered to Amara. She nodded, understanding immediately. As she fired another shot, keeping the thieves' attention on the front of the cabin, Luke slipped out the back. He circled wide, using the darkness and scrub brush for cover. The thieves had left one man to watch their horses while the others surrounded the cabin. Luke crept up behind him, reversed his rifle, and brought the butt down hard. The man crumpled silently. Taking the man's pistol, Luke now had weapons in both hands. He moved toward the barn where 2 thieves were splashing kerosene on the walls. They were so focused on their task they didn't hear him approach. "Drop them," Luke commanded. One spun. Reaching for his gun, Luke shot him in the leg, dropping him screaming. The other raised his hands quickly. "Call off your boys," Luke ordered. "Now." But before the man could speak, the air changed. A wall of dust rose on the horizon, glowing orange in the rising sun. The horses began to dance nervously, whinnying in fear. "Dust storm!" someone shouted. The thieves forgot about the barn, running for their horses. Luke let them go. Nature would be a harsher judge than any court. He raced back to the cabin as the storm bore down on them. "Inside!" he yelled to Amara, who was still at her post. They barely made it through the door before the storm hit. The world outside vanished in a brown wall of dust and debris. The cabin shook, wind screaming through every gap in the walls. Dust poured in despite their efforts to seal cracks with cloth. Luke found Amara in the chaos, pulling her against him as a particularly violent gust threatened to tear the roof off. She didn't protest, burying her face against his shoulder as the storm raged. For what seemed like hours, they huddled together while the wind howled like a living thing. The lamp had blown out, leaving them in an eerie twilight. Dust filled their lungs, making breathing difficult. "The horses," Amara gasped between coughs. "They'll find shelter," Luke assured her, though he worried too. "Animals know how to survive out here." Finally, the worst passed. The wind died to a moan, then a whisper. Luke and Amara separated awkwardly, suddenly aware of how close they'd been. "You all right?" Luke asked. She nodded, dust coating her dark skin with a gray film. "We should check the animals." They ventured outside to a transformed landscape. Dust drifts leaned against the cabin walls. The chicken coop had been partially buried, but miraculously, the barn still stood. They found the horses huddled in the barn's lee, shaken but unharmed. The cow lowed mournfully, and most of the chickens had survived by pressing themselves into a corner of their coop. "Could have been worse," Luke said, surveying the damage. "Those men," Amara began, then stopped. "Do you think they made it?" Luke looked toward the horizon where the thieves had fled. "Hard to say. Dust storms don't play favorites." They spent the day digging out and repairing damage, working side by side. They fell into an easy partnership. When the water bucket ran dry, Amara refilled it without being asked. When she struggled to lift a fallen beam, Luke appeared at her elbow to help. As the sun set, they sat on the porch steps, exhausted but satisfied. The evening light painted the dust-scoured landscape in shades of gold and purple. "You handled yourself well this morning," Luke said. "That was some shooting. My husband taught me." Amara replied. "He said a woman alone needed to be able to protect herself. I never thought I'd have to use it. You saved our horses, maybe our lives." She looked at him sideways. "Our horses." Luke realized what he'd said and felt heat rise to his face. "Well, I mean, you're here, aren't you? Working as hard as any partner would." "Partner," she repeated softly. "I like that better than wife." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. The stars emerged, brilliant in the clear post-storm air. "Can I ask you something?" Amara said suddenly. "Why aren't you married? I mean, before this, a man like you. Steady work, your own land. Seems like you'd have your pick." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Never found the right woman. I guess always seemed like the ones who were interested wanted to change me, make me into something I'm not, a town man, a shopkeeper, and He paused, searching for words. "I've been alone so long. I figured that's just how it was meant to be. Being alone isn't the worst thing," Amara said. "Being with the wrong person is worse. Was your husband the right person?" A sad smile touched her lips. "Thomas was a good man, kind, hard-working. We were building something together. When the mine collapsed," she trailed off, lost in memory. "I'm sorry," Luke said quietly. "So am I. Sorry for him, sorry for what we lost. But I'm still here, and that has to count for something." The next morning brought visitors. Mrs. Patterson arrived in her buggy, accompanied by her daughter Sarah, a cheerful girl of about 16. "Thought you might need some things after that storm," Mrs. Patterson said, producing baskets of food and supplies. "Nasty one, wasn't it?" While the women visited, Luke noticed how Mrs. Patterson treated Amara with genuine warmth. Sarah peppered her with questions about her sewing, admiring the quilt work visible through the cabin window. "Mother, look at these stitches," Sarah exclaimed. "Could you teach me that pattern, Mrs. Morrison?" Amara looked startled but pleased. "Of course, if you'd like." After they left, Amara stood in the doorway watching the buggy disappear into the distance. "She didn't have to do that," she said wonderingly. "Eleanor Patterson's good people." Luke said, "Not everyone in town is like Blackwood and his cronies. It's been so long since—" Amara stopped, blinking rapidly. "Since anyone treated me like just another woman. Not a colored woman, not a widow, just a neighbor." Luke felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't expected. "You are just another woman," he said firmly. "Anyone who can't see that is a fool." She turned to him then, and for a moment something electric passed between them. But before either could speak, they heard horses approaching again. Luke tensed, reaching for his rifle, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Ben Carter riding up with a deputy. "Luke," the sheriff greeted, dismounting heavily. He was a fair man, even-handed in his justice, one of the few Luke truly respected. "Ma'am," he tipped his hat to Amara. "Ben," Luke nodded. "What brings you out here?" "Found 3 bodies out on the prairie. What was left of them after the storm. Anyway, horse thieves. By the look of them, you wouldn't know anything about that." Luke met his gaze steadily. "They came here looking for trouble. We defended ourselves. The storm did the rest." Sheriff Carter studied them both, taking in the damage to the property, the defensive positions. "Self-defense, then—" "Yes, sir." Amara spoke up. "They threatened to burn the barn, and worse." The sheriff's expression darkened. He'd seen enough of frontier justice to know what worse meant. "Well, seems to me you folks did what you had to do. I'll put it down as death by misadventure. Doubt anyone will mourn those particular fellows." After the sheriff left, Luke found Amara sitting at the table, hands folded, very still. "You all right?" "I helped kill men today," she said quietly. "I know they were bad men, but still—" Luke sat across from her. "It's never easy, taking a life, even when you have no choice. But you did have a choice. Let them destroy everything we've worked for. Or fight back. You chose to survive." "We," she corrected, looking up at him. "We chose to survive." That night, as had become their custom, Luke spread his blankets by the stove. But as he settled in, Amara's voice stopped him. "Luke, this is foolish. You've been sleeping on that hard floor for weeks. The bed is big enough for two, with a blanket down the middle for propriety. You'll ruin your back down there." Luke hesitated. It was practical, sensible even. And after the day they'd had, fighting side by side, something had changed between them. "If you're sure," he said carefully. They arranged the bed with a rolled blanket as a barrier, each keeping to their side. It was awkward at first, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. But exhaustion won out, and soon Luke heard Amara's breathing deepen into sleep. As he lay there, listening to the night sounds and her quiet breathing, Luke realized something had shifted fundamentally. They'd started as strangers forced together, but now they were something else. Partners, maybe, friends, possibly, and perhaps, just perhaps, something more was growing in the fertile ground of shared hardship and mutual respect, like the prairie grass that bent before storms but never broke. They were learning to survive together. The game that had brought them together was far from over, but for the first time, Luke began to think they might actually win. The rumors started as whispers, carried on the wind like tumbleweeds across the prairie. By the time they reached Luke and Amara's cabin, they had grown into something more sinister. "Jeremiah Hawthorne's been making noise in town," Tom Patterson told Luke when he came to collect his wages. "Says he's got his eye on your land, and—" The rancher paused uncomfortably. "He's been saying things about your wife." Luke's hands stilled on the saddle he was mending. "What kind of things?" "Nothing worth repeating. But Luke, Hawthorne's got money and influence. He owns half the territory's cattle and has judges in his pocket. Be careful." That evening, Luke shared the news with Amara as they prepared dinner together. She listened quietly, her hands never pausing in their work of kneading bread. "I know of Hawthorne," she said finally. "He tried to buy Thomas's land after the accident. When I refused, he made threats. Nothing direct, but enough to make his meaning clear. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him with those deep brown eyes that had become so familiar over the past weeks. "What would you have done? We both know the law isn't written for people like me." The truth of it sat heavy between them. Luke had seen enough of frontier justice to know she was right. 3 days later, they discovered what Hawthorne meant by pressure. Luke had gone to town for supplies, leaving Amara to tend the homestead. When he arrived at Henderson's store, Martha Henderson met him at the door. "I'm sorry, Luke," she said, though her eyes held no sympathy. "We can't serve you anymore, mister. Hawthorne holds our loans, and he's made it clear that anyone who does business with you will find those loans called in." Luke tried the other shops with the same result. Even Charlie Banks at the feed store, who'd known Luke for years, turned him away with apologetic shrugs. By the time Luke left town, his wagon was empty save for what little he'd managed to buy from a traveling peddler at twice the usual price. "We'll make do," Amara said when he told her. She'd already started planning, rationing what they had, expanding the garden, setting snares for rabbits. "I've survived on less." But Hawthorne wasn't done. The next week, their fences were cut and cattle wandered onto their property. Hawthorne cattle, naturally. When Luke tried to drive them off, Hawthorne's men appeared, claiming Luke was rustling. "Everyone knows these are your boss's animals," Luke told Red McCann, Hawthorne's foreman. "This is a setup." Red smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Prove it. Meanwhile, Mr. Hawthorne wants compensation for the stress you've caused his stock." Luke's fists clenched, but Amara's hand on his arm stopped him. Violence would only give them the excuse they wanted. Winter was approaching, and their situation grew desperate. They needed supplies to survive the harsh Wyoming winter, but every door in town remained closed to them. Luke made a decision. "I'm going over the mountains to Bridger," he told Amara. "It's 3 days' ride, but they don't know us there. I can get what we need." "The passes are already getting snow," Amara protested. "It's dangerous." "Staying here without supplies is more dangerous." He paused, then added quietly, "I won't let you starve because of my poor choices that night in the saloon." "Our choices," she corrected firmly. "I chose to marry you, remember? For my own reasons. This is our fight, not just yours." Something warm bloomed in Luke's chest at her words. Over the past weeks, the word "our" had become natural between them. He left before dawn the next day, taking the mountain trail that wound up through pine forests and rocky passes. The first day went well enough, though he could see storm clouds building over the peaks. By the second day, snow was falling steadily. Luke pushed on, knowing he had to reach Bridger before the passes became impassable. His horse struggled through deepening drifts, and more than once, Luke had to dismount and lead the animal through particularly treacherous sections. On the night of the second day, disaster struck. Wolves, made bold by winter hunger, circled his camp. Luke built up his fire and kept his rifle ready, but the pack was determined. When they finally attacked, it was from multiple directions at once. Luke shot 2 before they reached him, but a third caught his horse. The animal's screams were terrible in the night. Luke drove off the pack, but the damage was done. His horse was badly wounded, unable to continue. With a heavy heart, Luke did what had to be done, then cached what supplies he could carry and continued on foot. The storm worsened, turning the world into a white void. Ice formed on his beard and eyebrows. His feet went numb in his boots. By the time Luke stumbled into Bridger, he was half frozen and delirious. The townspeople took him to the doctor, who treated his frostbite and exhaustion. "You're lucky, Doctor," Mills told him. "Another few hours and you'd have lost those toes. What possessed you to cross the mountains in this weather?" Luke explained his situation through chattering teeth. The doctor's expression grew grave. "Hawthorne. I've heard that name. He's been buying up land all over the territory, by whatever means necessary. You rest here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll see about getting you supplies and a horse for the return journey." Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Amara faced her own trials. On the second night of Luke's absence, riders approached. She recognized Red McCann's voice calling out, "Mrs. Morrison, we know you're alone in there. Mr. Hawthorne wants to make you an offer. Come out and talk civilized-like." Amara checked the loads in both the rifle and shotgun, then answered through the barred door. "Say what you have to say from there. Mr. Hawthorne will pay good money for this land, enough for you to start over somewhere else. Maybe California, where folks are more accepting of mixed marriages." "This is my home," Amara called back. "Tell Hawthorne it's not for sale. Now don't be stubborn. A woman alone out here, especially a colored woman. Accidents happen. Why, just last month, the widow Chen's place burned down. Terrible tragedy." The threat was clear. Amara's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "I'm recording this conversation in writing. Mr. McCann, if anything happens to this property or to me, that record will find its way to the federal marshal. I doubt even Hawthorne owns him." There was muttering among the men. Finally, Red called out, "You've got grit, woman, but grit won't keep you warm when winter really sets in. Think about the offer." They rode off, but Amara didn't sleep that night. She kept watch at the window, rifle across her lap, wondering if Luke was safe, if he'd return, if she could hold out alone. On the 4th day, she spotted a lone figure trudging through the snow toward the cabin. Her heart leapt, then sank as she realized the figure was on foot. She rushed out to meet Luke, who was leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. "What happened?" she asked, supporting him as he stumbled the last few yards. Through blue lips, he told her about the wolves and the storm. She got him inside, pulling off his frozen boots and wrapping him in blankets by the fire. As she worked, she told him about Hawthorne's men. "We're running out of options," Luke said wearily. "No," Amara said firmly. "We're just beginning to fight. Hawthorne thinks we're weak, isolated, but we're not alone." "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Patterson came by yesterday. She and some of the other ranch wives are upset about Hawthorne's tactics. They're organizing a meeting, and Sheriff Carter stopped by too. He can't move against Hawthorne directly, but he's watching. He said to tell you that the federal marshal will be through here next month." Luke looked at his wife, and he realized that's how he'd come to think of her, not as the woman forced upon him, but as his wife, with new admiration. While he'd been gone, she'd been building alliances, thinking strategically. "You've been busy," he said with a weak smile. "We're partners, remember? You risk your life crossing mountains for supplies. I work on the politics." She paused, then added softly, "I was worried about you." "I was worried about you too," Luke admitted. "The whole time in those mountains, all I could think about was getting back here, making sure you were safe." Their eyes met and held. The space between them, once filled with awkwardness and resentment, now hummed with something else entirely. "Luke," Amara began, then stopped, seeming to gather courage. "This started as a forced arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became more, at least for me." Luke's heart pounded. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, he took her hand in his. "For me too," he said roughly. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you stood with me against those thieves, or when you called us partners, or any of a dozen other moments. But Amara, A gunshot shattered the window, cutting off his words. They dove for cover as more shots followed. "Hawthorne's done talking," Red McCann's voice carried through the broken window. "You've got 1 minute to come out, or we burn you out." Luke and Amara looked at each other. After all they'd survived, it might end here. But Luke saw no defeat in Amara's eyes, only determination. "Together?" she asked. "Together," he confirmed, checking his rifle. They took positions at opposite windows. Whatever came next, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything else, side by side. Partners in truth, and perhaps something more. The minute was almost up. Luke could see torches being lit outside, but then, in the distance, came the sound of many horses approaching fast. "What the hell?" Red McCann's voice was uncertain now. Sheriff Carter's voice rang out clear in the night. "Drop those weapons. Boys, this is a lawfully deputized posse, and you're all under arrest for attempted arson and assault." Luke peered out to see not just the sheriff, but Tom Patterson and a dozen other ranchers, all armed, surrounding Hawthorne's men. "You can't arrest us," Red protested. "We're protecting Mr. Hawthorne's interests." "Mr. Hawthorne's interests don't include burning out honest homesteaders." "Mrs. Patterson called out, and Luke was amazed to see her sitting in a wagon with several other ranch wives, all holding rifles. "We've had enough of his bullying." The standoff was brief. Outnumbered and caught in the act, Hawthorne's men surrendered. As the sheriff led them away, Tom Patterson approached the cabin. "You folks all right in there?" Luke and Amara emerged, still hardly believing the turn of events. "How did you know?" Luke asked. "Your wife sent word through Sarah." "Mrs." Patterson explained. "Smart woman you've got there. Luke, she figured Hawthorne would make his move while you were gone and arranged for us to keep watch. When we saw them riding out armed, we gathered everyone we could." Luke looked at Amara with amazement and growing love. She'd saved them both with her foresight and courage. As their rescuers prepared to leave, Sheriff Carter pulled Luke aside. "This isn't over. Hawthorne will try again, through legal channels most likely. But you've got the community behind you now. That counts for something." When they were alone again, Luke and Amara stood in their damaged cabin, snow drifting through the broken window. Despite everything, Luke felt more hopeful than he had in weeks. "What were you saying before we were interrupted?" Amara asked softly. Luke pulled her close, no longer held back by propriety or the circumstances that had brought them together. "I was saying that I love you, Mrs. Morrison. Somehow, in all this mess, I fell in love with my wife." Tears gathered in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "And I love you, Mr. Morrison, forced marriage or not." They kissed then, their first real kiss, while snow swirled around them and the future remained uncertain. But they had each other, they had allies, and they had love. The game that had started in a saloon was entering its final phase, and together, they were determined to win. The broken window had been boarded over, but drafts still found their way through the cracks as Luke and Amara sat by the fire that evening. The excitement of the confrontation had faded, leaving them with the reality of their situation and the new understanding that had bloomed between them. "We should talk about earlier," Amara said quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "What we said to each other." Luke shifted in his chair. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the magnitude of their confessions hung in the air. "I meant it," he said simply. "Every word." "So did I." She looked at him across the small space, firelight dancing in her eyes. "But meaning it doesn't make this simple. We're still who we are. The world is still what it is." "The world can go hang," Luke said fiercely. "What matters is what we want. And what do you want, Luke Morrison?" He stood, crossing to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in both of his. He spoke with quiet intensity. "I want to wake up beside you every morning without a blanket barrier between us. I want to build a real life together, not just survive. I want children who have your strength and grace. I want to grow old watching sunsets from that porch we're going to build." Amara's breath caught. She touched his face gently, tracing the lines that sun and wind had etched there. "You know what you're saying. The life you're describing won't be easy. Mixed children face even more hardship than their parents." "Since when have we chosen easy?" Luke asked. "Besides, any child of yours would be strong enough to face whatever the world throws at them." She was quiet for a long moment, then spoke so softly he had to lean close to hear. "I lost a baby before Thomas died. The doctor said I might not be able to." She stopped, unable to continue. Luke gathered her into his arms, feeling her tremble. "Then we'll face that too, if we have to, together." "But Amara, don't close the door on hope because of fear." She pulled back to look at him. "When did you become so wise?" "Must be your influence," he said with a slight smile. "You've been teaching me all kinds of things since you got here." "Like what?" "Like how to be a partner instead of a loner. How to think beyond the next day. How to fight with more than just my fists." He paused. "How to love someone more than I love my own stubborn pride." This time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper, full of promise. When they parted, Amara stood, extending her hand. "No more blanket barrier?" she asked softly. "No more barriers at all." Luke agreed, taking her hand. Later, as they lay entwined in the bed they now truly shared, Amara traced lazy patterns on Luke's chest. "Tell me about your family," she said. "You've never really spoken of them." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring up at the ceiling, he began to speak. "My PA was a drunk. Mean one. 2, Ma tried her best, but 5 kids and a husband who spent more time with a bottle than working wore her down. I left when I was 15. Figured I'd make my own way." "Do you ever wonder about them?" "Sometimes. Had a letter a few years back saying Ma had passed. Pa followed not long after. My brothers and sisters scattered to the winds." He turned to look at her. "What about you? You've mentioned your mother's quilting, but nothing else." Amara's expression grew distant. "I was born into slavery in Georgia. I was only 5 when the war ended, but I remember some things, the fear, the uncertainty. After freedom came, we tried to make a go of it as sharecroppers, but—" She shrugged. "You know how that story goes. My parents saved every penny to send me north to school. They died thinking I'd have a better life." "You will," Luke said firmly. "We will." "Such certainty," she murmured. Where does it come from? From you, he answered. Before you came, I was just existing. Now I have something worth fighting for. They talked through the night, sharing stories of hardship and small triumphs, dreams deferred, and new ones taking shape. By dawn, they knew each other in ways that went beyond the physical intimacy they'd shared. As morning light crept through the windows, Amara suddenly sat up. Luke, what if we didn't just wait for Hawthorne's next move? What if we took the fight to him? What do you mean? I've been thinking. Hawthorne's power comes from fear and isolation. He picks off homesteaders one by one, but what if we united them, created an association? Luke considered this. Like a farmers' alliance? Exactly. Pool resources, share labor, stand together against threats. Mrs. Patterson mentioned other families who've been pressured by Hawthorne. If we could organize them. It's brilliant, Luke said, sitting up as well. But it's also dangerous. Hawthorne won't sit idle while we build opposition to him. He's not sitting idle now, Amara pointed out. At least this way. We're not just reacting. They spent the morning making plans, energized by having a direction beyond mere survival. Luke would ride out to neighboring homesteads, feeling out interest. Amara would work with the ranch wives who'd already shown support. Their first convert came unexpectedly. That afternoon, a wagon approached carrying Clarence and Mary Kowalski, Polish immigrants who farmed 40 acres to the east. We heard what happened, Clarence said in heavily accented English. Hawthorne's men, they come to us too, say we sell or have accident. You're not alone, Luke told them. We're organizing, standing together. Mary Kowalski, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, clasped Amara's hands. Is good. What you do. In old country, we know about standing together against powerful men. Over the next weeks, despite winter's grip on the land, the movement grew. The Pattersons hosted the first official meeting in their large barn. 20 families attended, representing most of the smallholders in the valley. Luke stood before the group, nervous but determined. We all know why we're here. Jeremiah Hawthorne thinks he can drive us off our land, take what we've built with sweat and blood, but he's counting on us being divided, afraid. What can we do against his money and gunmen? Called out James Chen, whose family ran a small vegetable farm. Plenty. Amara stood, moving to stand beside Luke. First, we establish a common fund. Any family that's cut off from town supplies gets help from the others. Second, we create patrol schedules. No more isolated homesteads, vulnerable to night riders. And legally? Asked Wilhelm Schmidt, an elderly German farmer. Hawthorne has lawyers. So will we, Luke said. We've already wired the territorial capital. There's a young lawyer there, Edward Tompkins, who's made a name fighting land grabbers. He's agreed to take our case. The meeting continued for hours, hammering out details. Some were skeptical, others fearful, but by the end, the Cheyenne Valley Homesteaders Association was born, as families departed. Sheriff Carter approached Luke and Amara. Word of advice, he said quietly. Hawthorne's in Denver on business, but he'll be back within the week. When he learns about this, he shook his head. Just be ready. That night, as Luke and Amara prepared for bed, she noticed him checking his rifle for the third time. Are you worried? She asked. Cautious, he corrected. We've painted a target on ourselves, but Amara, seeing those families come together, having hope instead of fear, it's worth the risk. She moved into his arms. I never thanked you. For what? For becoming the man I needed you to be. When we first married, you were angry, bitter about being forced into this. You could have made my life miserable. You changed me, Luke said simply. Showed me there was more to life than just getting by. Made me want to be better. We changed each other, she corrected. 3 nights later, they woke to the smell of smoke. Luke bolted upright, instantly alert. The barn, Amara gasped, seeing an orange light flickering through the window. They rushed out to find the haystack beside the barn ablaze, working frantically. They formed a bucket brigade from the well, Just as the fire threatened to spread to the barn itself, riders appeared out of the darkness, their neighbors, responding to the patrol system they'd established. Within an hour, the fire was out, the barn saved. As dawn broke, they surveyed the damage. It could have been worse, much worse. "Hawthorne's back," Tom Patterson said grimly. "This is just the beginning." But as Luke looked around at his neighbors, Polish immigrants, Chinese farmers, German homesteaders, American ranchers, all united in common cause, he felt hope rather than fear. And at the center of it all stood Amara, soot-streaked but unbroken, organizing the cleanup with quiet efficiency. "I need to tell you something," Luke said, pulling her aside as the others worked. "Now?" she asked, wiping ash from her face. "Now," he confirmed. "Before whatever comes next, Amara Johnson Morrison, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. What started as the worst bet I ever lost has become my greatest win. You asked once what I wanted. I want you, for all my days, in whatever way this life allows. Not because a preacher said words over us, but because I choose you, every day, for every reason." Tears cut tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "Luke Morrison, you impossible, wonderful man. I choose you too. For the fights ahead, for the quiet moments between, for the life we're building against all odds." They kissed there in their burned field, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, facing an uncertain future, but no longer facing it alone. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley, Luke remembered his drunken words at their forced wedding. Cowboy lost a bet, forced to wed a black beauty, but maybe the game's not done yet. The game wasn't done, but it had transformed into something neither of them had expected. What began in humiliation had become love. What started as punishment had become partnership. And what Hawthorne meant for evil, they were turning to good. "We should get back to work," Amara said practically, though her eyes still shone with emotion. "In a minute," Luke said, holding her close. "Just let me remember this moment. You and me, standing in a burned field, covered in soot, with half the valley watching and feeling like the luckiest man alive." She laughed, the sound bright as morning. "Only you could find romance in arson and ash. Only you could make me want to," he replied. Hand in hand, they returned to their neighbors, to the work of rebuilding and resistance. Whatever came next, they would meet it together, a cowboy and a lady, bound first by chance, now by choice, proving that the love could grow even in the harshest ground. The morning Jeremiah Hawthorne arrived at their homestead, Luke was repairing the fence damaged in the fire, while Amara tended to an injured calf in the barn. The sound of approaching horses made them both tense. But it wasn't night riders this time. It was a procession in broad daylight. Hawthorne himself rode at the front, a heavy-set man in his 50s with silver hair and cold gray eyes that reminded Luke unpleasantly of Snake Eye Sullivan. He was flanked by 6 armed men and followed by Samuel Blackwood in a fancy carriage. "Morrison," Hawthorne called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to discuss your recent activities." Luke set down his tools deliberately, noting Amara emerging from the barn with a shotgun. Their neighbors were too far to help if this turned violent. "Nothing to discuss," Luke replied evenly. "This is private property. State your business or move on." Hawthorne's face reddened. "Your little association has disrupted the natural order of things. I'm here to make you a final offer, $10,000 for your land. Take it and leave the territory." "Not for sale," Luke said flatly. "Everything's for sale, boy. It's just a matter of price." Hawthorne's gaze slid to Amara with undisguised contempt. "Though I can't imagine what you'd want to stay for. Must be degrading. A white man reduced to—" "Choose your next words very carefully," Luke interrupted, his voice dangerous. Blackwood leaned out of his carriage. Now, let's keep this civilized. Mr. Hawthorne is trying to be generous. After all, this whole situation started because you couldn't control yourself at a poker table. Morrison, maybe it's time to fold." "The only thing I'm folding is your face if you insult my wife again." Luke growled. One of Hawthorne's men, a scar-faced gunslinger Luke recognized as Jake Murdoch, shifted his hand toward his pistol. "Want me to teach him some manners? Boss?" "Stand down," Sheriff Carter's voice rang out. He rode up with 2 deputies, positioning themselves between the groups. "Gentlemen, this is a peaceful county. Any violence and I'll arrest the lot of you, regardless of who pays your wages." Hawthorne smiled coldly. "No need for unpleasantness. Sheriff, I'm simply making a business offer, but Mrs. Morrison should know that her background is well documented. A former slave, married to a mine worker who died under mysterious circumstances, now married to a white man who lost her in a poker game. A territorial judge might find such a history interesting." Amara stepped forward, her dignity unshaken despite the slurs. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Hawthorne?" "Merely observing, Madam. The law can be interpreted many ways." "Then let me make an observation," Amara said, her voice carrying clearly. "You claim to represent civilization and order, yet you employ night riders and arsonists. You speak of the law while corrupting it with bribes. You consider yourself superior while acting with less honor than any person here you'd call beneath you." Hawthorne's face darkened. "You dare?" "I dare speak truth," Amara continued. "And here's another truth. We have documented every threat, every attack, every attempted bribe. Attorney Tompkins has filed copies with the territorial governor and the federal marshal. Your reign of terror is ending, Mr. Hawthorne." "Big words from a woman who should know her place," Murdoch snarled. What happened next occurred almost too fast to follow. Murdoch's hand moved to his gun. Luke dove for his rifle, and Amara raised her shotgun. But before anyone could fire, a shot rang out from the ridge above. Murdoch's hat flew off his head, and everyone turned to see Tom Patterson and 5 other association members positioned on the high ground, rifles trained on Hawthorne's group. "Looks like you're outnumbered," Patterson called down. "I'd ride on if I were you." Hawthorne's jaw worked furiously. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think your little alliance protects you? I own judges, sheriffs in 3 counties, even a federal marshal. I'll see you all hanged or driven out." "Maybe," Luke said, moving to stand beside Amara. "But you'll have to go through all of us, and we're not going anywhere." After a tense moment, Hawthorne wheeled his horse around. "Move out," he barked to his men. As they rode away, he called over his shoulder. "You've made a powerful enemy today. Morrison, you and your woman both." When they were gone, Luke felt the tension drain from his body. Amara lowered her shotgun with shaking hands. "Thank you, Tom." Luke called to the ridge. "Association looks after its own," Patterson replied. "Though I think you've lit a mighty big fuse, Luke." That evening, their cabin was full of association members discussing the confrontation. Edward Tompkins had arrived from the capital, a thin young man with intelligent eyes and an earnest manner. "Hawthorne's threats about the law aren't empty," he warned. "He does have influence, but so do we. I've been in touch with newspaper editors in Denver and Chicago. They're interested in the story. Wealthy cattle baron terrorizing small farmers makes good copy." "Public opinion matters," agreed Eleanor Patterson. "Even corrupt judges hesitate when the whole nation is watching." As strategies were debated, Luke noticed Amara slip outside. He found her on the porch, staring at the stars. "You were magnificent today," he said, sitting beside her. "I was terrified," she admitted. When he mentioned Thomas, suggested I had something to do with his death. "No one who knows you would believe that. No one knows me, Luke. Not really. To them. I'm just a colored woman who married above her station." Luke took her hand. "You're wrong. They know you now, our neighbors, the association. You've shown them who you are through actions, not just words." She leaned against him. "Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting a battle we can't win." "Maybe, but you taught me something. Surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to stand up, even when the odds are against you." 2 days later, one of their association members, William Foster, burst into a meeting with devastating news. His son Daniel, just 17, had been shot while checking their fence line. "He's alive?" Foster said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "But Doc says he may not walk again. It was Murdoch and 2 others. They said it was a warning." Rage filled the room. Men spoke of riding on Hawthorne's ranch, of meeting violence with violence. Luke felt the same fury, but saw Amara watching him, waiting. He stood slowly. "William, I'm sorry about Daniel. We all are. And yes, we could ride out tonight, guns blazing. Some of us would die. Some of them would die. And tomorrow we'd have federal troops here putting down an insurrection." "So we do nothing?" Chen demanded. "We do something better," Luke said. "We use the law. Sheriff Carter, will you arrest Murdoch?" Carter nodded grimly. "With witnesses, yes, but he'll make bail. And Hawthorne's judges will face federal oversight." Tompkins interrupted. "I've been busy. The territorial governor is sending a special prosecutor, and..." He smiled slightly. "A reporter from the Chicago Tribune arrives tomorrow." The tide began to turn. When Sheriff Carter arrested Murdoch, Hawthorne's lawyers appeared immediately, but so did the special prosecutor. The bail hearing became a sensation when the Tribune reporter's stories hit the wire services. "Reign of Terror in Wyoming," read one headline. "Cattle Baron's Private War," proclaimed another. Amara worked tirelessly, organizing the women to care for the Foster family, coordinating supplies, keeping meticulous records of every incident. Luke watched her with growing admiration and love. One evening, as she updated her ledgers by lamplight, he asked, "Do you ever regret it? If you'd refused to marry me, found some other way to fight Blackwood?" She looked up, considering. "Ask me something. If you could go back to that poker game, knowing everything that would follow, would you still make that bet?" Luke thought of all that had happened, the hardship, the danger, but also the love, the purpose, the woman who'd become his world. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "because it brought me you." "Then there's your answer," she said softly. The legal battles intensified. Murdoch's trial became a flashpoint. Hawthorne brought in expensive lawyers from San Francisco, but the association had something more powerful, the truth, meticulously documented, and public opinion firmly on their side. When young Daniel Foster testified from his wheelchair, describing the attack in halting words, even hardened spectators wept. When association members detailed the campaign of terror, the pattern became undeniable. The verdict was guilty. Murdoch would serve 10 years hard labor. That night, Hawthorne made his last, desperate move. Luke woke to Amara shaking him urgently. "Fire!" she gasped. "Not here in town." They could see the glow from their window. Racing to town, they found the association's meeting hall ablaze, along with 2 adjacent buildings. The whole town turned out to fight the fire, but the damage was done. Hawthorne's ranch hands were seen leaving town just before the fire started. Sheriff Carter told them as dawn broke over the scorched buildings. But Hawthorne had overplayed his hand. The fire had spread to businesses owned by previously neutral townspeople. Public opinion, even among those who'd benefited from Hawthorne's patronage, turned decisively. The next day, a federal marshal arrived with a warrant for Hawthorne's arrest on charges of conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. When they rode to arrest him, they found the cattle baron in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand. "You've won this round," he told Luke, who'd accompanied the lawmen. "But don't think this is over. Men like me don't stay down. Men like you always think you're above consequences." Luke replied, "But you're wrong. You're just a bully with money." And we stopped being afraid. As Hawthorne was led away in shackles, Luke felt no triumph, only relief. The fight had been long and costly. Back at their cabin that evening, Luke found Amara in the garden she'd coaxed from the harsh soil. She was picking vegetables for dinner, humming softly. "It's over," he said. "This part is," she corrected, straightening to look at him. "There will be other challenges. But we've proven something important, that people standing together can defeat those who would oppress them. We've proven something else too, Luke said, pulling her close. That love can grow in the most unlikely places. She smiled, touching his face. A black woman and a white cowboy in Wyoming territory. Who would have believed it? Anyone who knows us now. Luke said simply. As the sun set over their land, really theirs now, free from threat, they stood together, planning a future that once seemed impossible. The association would continue, helping new settlers, protecting the vulnerable. Their story would inspire others facing similar battles. I've been thinking, Amara said as they walked back to the cabin, that spare room could be a nursery. Luke stopped walking. Are you? Not yet, she said quickly. But I want to try, to hope, if you do. In answer, Luke swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold of their home. What had begun with a lost bet and forced marriage had become something neither expected. A love strong enough to challenge injustice, deep enough to bridge divisions, and real enough to build a life upon. The circuit judge arrived in Cheyenne Creek on a cold November morning, his black carriage cutting an imposing figure against the frost-covered landscape. Judge Theodore Whitman had a reputation for fairness, which was why the territorial governor had specifically assigned him to oversee the land dispute cases that had torn the valley apart. Luke adjusted his collar nervously as he and Amara entered the makeshift courtroom in the town hall. The space was packed with homesteaders, townspeople, and reporters who'd traveled from as far as San Francisco to witness what many called the trial of the century for Wyoming territory. The court will come to order, Judge Whitman announced, his gavel ringing sharply. He was a thin man with penetrating eyes that seemed to miss nothing. We are here to address multiple cases of land ownership disputes, allegations of conspiracy, and claims of illegal coercion. Edward Tompkins stood for the homesteaders, his youth belied by his commanding presence. Across the aisle, Hawthorne's team of lawyers looked like circling vultures in their expensive suits. The first day focused on establishing facts, one by one. Homesteaders testified about threats, burned barns, poisoned wells, and murdered livestock. Amara kept detailed notes, occasionally passing observations to Tompkins. When Sheriff Carter took the stand, Hawthorne's lead attorney, Marcus Pemberton, tried to discredit him. Isn't it true, Sheriff, that you've shown favoritism to the homesteaders? I've upheld the law. Carter replied steadily, if that favors honest folk over criminals, so be it. Objection, Pemberton snapped. Prejudicial. Overruled. Judge Whitman said mildly, continue. Sheriff? The most dramatic moment came when Blackwood was called to testify. The banker had been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, and his revelations sent ripples through the courtroom. Hawthorne and I had an arrangement, he admitted, sweating profusely. He identified properties he wanted. I called in loans or created circumstances that forced sales. What kind of circumstances? Tompkins pressed. Blackwood's gaze flickered to Luke and Amara. Sometimes we arranged situations, like the poker game where Morrison lost. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitman hammered his gavel repeatedly. Order. I will clear this courtroom. When quiet resumed, Tompkins continued, are you saying the poker game was rigged? Snake Eye Sullivan was paid to ensure Morrison lost. The bet to marry the widow Johnson was Hawthorne's idea. He wanted her land because of the water rights. Luke felt Amara's hand find his under the table. All these months, they'd suspected but never known for certain. Pemberton tried damage control on cross-examination. Mr. Blackwood, weren't you simply making legitimate business arrangements? I told myself that, Blackwood said miserably. But when people started getting hurt, killed even, I knew it had gone too far. On the third day, Amara was called to testify. Luke watched proudly as she took the stand, head high despite the weight of every eye upon her. State your name for the record, the clerk instructed. Amara Johnson Morrison, she said clearly. Tompkins led her through the story, her first husband's death, Blackwood's threats, the forced marriage, and the campaign of terror that followed. Mrs. Morrison, Tompkins said gently. Some have suggested you married Luke Morrison for protection, that this was a calculated move on your part. Amara's eyes flashed. I married Luke because the alternative was losing everything my first husband and I had worked for. But if you're asking whether I regret it, the answer is no. What began as survival became love, real love, born from facing adversity together. Objection, Pemberton called. Relevance goes to motive and credibility. Tompkins argued. I'll allow it. Judge Whitman ruled. Pemberton's cross-examination was brutal. Mrs. Morrison, is it true you shot at Mr. Hawthorne's employees? I defended my home against night riders who threatened to burn us out. You took up arms against white men. The racial implication hung heavy in the air. Several association members shifted angrily. I took up arms against criminals, Amara replied with dignity. Their color was irrelevant to their crimes. But surely you understand how unusual it is for someone of your background to assert such rights. Amara lifted her chin. My background is that of an American citizen, Mr. Pemberton. The Constitution makes no mention of color when discussing the right to self-defense. Luke wanted to applaud. Even Judge Whitman seemed impressed by her composure. When Luke testified, he spoke plainly about everything, the drunken bet, his initial resentment, and the gradual realization that Amara was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Mr. Morrison, Pemberton sneered. Are you asking this court to believe that you fell in love with a woman you were forced to marry? A woman of a different race? I'm not asking you to believe anything. Luke replied, I'm telling you what happened. Love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. How poetic, Pemberton mocked. And convenient for your land claims. Luke's temper flared. What's convenient is rich men like Hawthorne thinking they can destroy lives for profit. What's convenient is lawyers like you defending theft and murder because it pays well. Mr. Morrison. Judge Whitman warned. I apologize, Your Honor, Luke said, though he didn't look sorry. The association members testified over 2 more days. The Kowalskis spoke through an interpreter about fleeing oppression in Poland only to find it in Wyoming. The Chens described the suspicious fire that had nearly killed their children. The Schmidts detailed the systematic poisoning of their well. Each story built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of organized terrorism. Finally, Hawthorne himself took the stand. Even in custody, he radiated arrogance. I built this territory, he declared. When I arrived, it was nothing but wilderness and savages. I brought civilization, prosperity, and terror. Tompkins interrupted. You brought terror to families trying to build honest lives. I brought progress, Hawthorne countered. Sometimes progress requires strong measures. Strong measures like burning out families, like shooting a 17-year-old boy. I never ordered anyone shot, Hawthorne said smoothly. If overzealous employees acted beyond their instructions, your employees testified you personally ordered the attacks. Tompkins reminded him. The word of criminals looking for leniency. Hawthorne dismissed. The closing arguments took most of the final day. Pemberton painted a picture of successful businessmen being persecuted by jealous smallholders, of natural market forces being misconstrued as conspiracy. Tompkins' response was masterful. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, the testimonies, the documents Amara had meticulously maintained, the pattern of violence that could not be coincidence. This is not about progress versus tradition, he concluded. This is about the rule of law versus the rule of force. It's about whether money and power exempt someone from justice. The homesteaders aren't asking for special treatment. They're asking for equal treatment under the law. Judge Whitman retired to consider his decision. The wait was excruciating. Luke and Amara sat with their neighbors in the hotel restaurant, trying to eat, but mostly pushing food around their plates. Whatever happens, Tom Patterson said, we've already won something. We stood together. We showed them we won't be pushed around. That's right, Mary Kowalski added. In old country. We never could speak against powerful men. Here, we speak is good. When court reconvened, the room was silent as a church. Judge Whitman looked solemn as he began reading his decision. The evidence presented clearly establishes a pattern of criminal conspiracy led by Jeremiah Hawthorne to illegally acquire lands through intimidation, violence, and corruption of legal processes. A collective exhale ran through the homesteader's side. Furthermore, the judge continued, the forced marriage of Luke Morrison and Amara Johnson Morrison represents a particularly egregious abuse of power. However, as both parties have testified to the validity of their current union, the court sees no need to address its initial circumstances beyond noting it as evidence of conspiracy. Luke squeezed Amara's hand tightly. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that all land transfers made under duress are null and void. Properties will be returned to their rightful owners. Mr. Hawthorne's assets will be seized to pay damages to affected families, and I recommend federal prosecution for Mr. Hawthorne and his conspirators on charges of racketeering. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Association members embraced, many crying openly. Luke pulled Amara into his arms, not caring about propriety or the watching crowd. "We did it," she whispered against his chest. "You did it," he corrected. "Your records, your courage, your refusal to give up." Judge Whitman hammered for order. "I'm not finished. This court has one more matter to address." The room quieted. Throughout these proceedings, I've been struck by the dignity and courage displayed by all the homesteaders, but particularly by Mrs. Amara Morrison. In the face of racial prejudice compounding already difficult circumstances, she has shown remarkable grace and intelligence. It is citizens like her who represent the best future of our growing nation. Amara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as the courtroom applauded. As they filed out, Pemberton approached. Luke tensed, but the lawyer's expression was thoughtful rather than hostile. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. My tactics in court were beneath me. You answered with more class than I deserved." Amara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We all do what we think we must. Mr. Pemberton, perhaps next time you'll choose your clients more carefully." That evening, the association threw an impromptu celebration at the rebuilt meeting hall. Music played, children danced, and hope filled the air like spring after a hard winter. Luke found Amara standing outside, looking at the stars. The celebration sounds drifted through the windows behind them. "No regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "None," she said firmly. "Oh, Luke, when I think of where we started—" "I lost a bet," Luke said, nuzzling her neck. "But I found the wife of my dreams." She turned in his arms. "And I found a partner worth fighting beside. Worth building a future with." "Speaking of the future," Luke said, suddenly nervous, "I never properly proposed. I mean, we're already married. But, Amara Johnson Morrison, will you choose to stay married to me, not because of a bet or threats, but because you want to?" She smiled through tears. "Yes, Luke Morrison. I choose you, today, tomorrow, and all the days after." They kissed under the Wyoming stars while their friends celebrated inside. The long game that had started with deception and greed had ended with truth and justice. But more than that, it had created something beautiful, a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle, and a community united in common cause. "We should go back in," Amara said eventually. "It's our victory too. Our victory." Luke agreed, loving the sound of it. "The first of many, I hope." Hand in hand, they returned to the celebration, to their chosen family of fellow fighters, to the future they'd won through courage, determination, and unexpected love. Spring arrived in Wyoming with the explosion of wildflowers across the prairie. The harsh winter that had tested their resolve was now a memory, replaced by warm breezes carrying the scent of sage and new grass. Luke stood on the rise overlooking their expanded property, watching Amara work in her garden below. The month since the trial had brought remarkable changes. With Hawthorne's reign of terror ended and his assets distributed among his victims, the valley had flourished. The association had evolved from a defensive alliance into a thriving cooperative, sharing resources and knowledge to everyone's benefit. "Admiring your kingdom." Tom Patterson's voice came from behind. Luke turned with a smile, just thinking how different it all looks now. "Amazing what folks can accomplish when fear's removed." Tom agreed. "Speaking of accomplishments, Eleanor wanted me to remind you about Sunday dinner. She's determined to teach Amara her apple pie recipe. We'll be there." Luke promised. The social barriers that had once seemed insurmountable had gradually crumbled as neighbors became true friends. Down in the garden, Amara straightened, shading her eyes to look up at them. She waved, and Luke's heart swelled as it did every time he saw her. Their love had deepened through winter's trials, becoming something unshakable. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in comfortable rhythm, Amara said quietly, "I have news." Something in her tone made Luke stop chopping vegetables. "Good news or bad news?" "That depends," she said, turning to face him with a mixture of joy and uncertainty in her eyes. "How do you feel about becoming a father?" The knife clattered from Luke's hand. Are we... Doctor, Mills confirmed it today. I'm about 3 months along." Luke crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby! Our baby! Careful!" she laughed, but she was crying too. "Oh, Luke, I was so afraid to hope, after losing one before." He set her down gently, cupping her face. "This one will be different. I can feel it. Our child, born free, born to parents who chose each other, born to face challenges we can't even imagine," Amara added softly, "and born strong enough to meet them." Luke said firmly, "With your courage and intelligence, and your stubbornness and integrity." She interrupted with a smile. They held each other in the golden evening light streaming through their kitchen window. Dreams of the future expanding to include a new life. Word of the pregnancy spread quickly through their close-knit community. Sarah Patterson immediately began knitting baby blankets, while Mary Kowalski shared remedies for morning sickness that had been passed down through generations of Polish women. Even gruff Wilhelm Schmidt carved a beautiful cradle from oak, presenting it with tears in his eyes. "It's for New American," he said simply. Born to freedom. Not everyone celebrated the news. There were still those in town who viewed their marriage with disgust, and the prospect of a mixed-race child brought out the worst in some. Anonymous notes appeared under their door, and once, someone threw a rock through their window. But for every act of hatred, there were 10 of love. When the window was broken, James Chen appeared the next morning with glass and tools. When the nasty notes arrived, Sheriff Carter made a point of riding by their property daily. "Cowards and fools," he told Luke. "Pay them no mind. That child will grow up in a better world than this one. Mark my words." As summer progressed and Amara's condition became visible, Luke found himself increasingly protective. He insisted on accompanying her to town, hovering until she laughingly told him to stop treating her like spun glass. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him as they loaded supplies. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Luke countered. "Not carrying my child." The moment was interrupted by a commotion down the street. A fancy carriage had arrived, and a well-dressed woman was stepping down. Luke didn't recognize her, but Amara gasped. "Charlotte!" The woman turned, her face breaking into a smile. "Amara, I finally found you!" The 2 women embraced tearfully while Luke looked on in confusion. Amara finally pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Luke, this is Charlotte Dupree. We grew up together in Georgia. Charlotte, my husband, Luke Morrison." Charlotte extended her hand, which Luke shook carefully. She was a beautiful woman of mixed race, with lighter skin than Amara but similar refined features. "I've been searching for you since I heard about Thomas," Charlotte said. "When the newspapers carried the story of the trial here, I knew it had to be you. Fighting injustice, standing tall, It sounded just like the girl I knew. They retired to the hotel restaurant for tea, where Charlotte revealed her story. After the war, she'd been taken in by a white family who educated her. She'd eventually married a French merchant in New Orleans and was now widowed but wealthy. "I came to see if you needed anything," she told Amara, "but I can see you found something money can't buy." Her gaze moved between them warmly. Real love and real community. Charlotte stayed for a week, and her presence was a revelation. Educated, wealthy, and confident, she challenged many townspeople's assumptions about what a woman of color could be. She donated generously to the association's school fund and promised to spread word of their success to other communities facing similar struggles. "You're creating something important here," she told them before leaving. "A model for how people can live together with respect and justice. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The summer passed in preparation and anticipation. Luke and the other men added a room to the cabin for the baby, while the women organized a quilting bee to create blankets and clothes. It became a celebration of community, with each family contributing squares that told their own stories. "Look," Amara showed Luke one evening, spreading the nearly finished quilt across their bed. "This square is from the Kowalskis. It's a Polish eagle. And this one from the Chens shows a crane for long life. The Schmidts contributed this pattern from Bavaria." "And this?" Luke asked, touching a square showing mountains against a sunset. "That's mine," Amara said softly. "It represents our view, our home, where our child will grow up free." As autumn arrived and Amara grew heavy with child, they received an unexpected visitor. Snake Eye Sullivan appeared at their gate, hat literally in hand. Luke's first instinct was to reach for his gun, but something in the gambler's demeanor stopped him. "I ain't here for trouble," Snake Eye said quickly. "I came to apologize, I guess, and to warn you." They listened warily as he explained. With Hawthorne imprisoned, various interests were maneuvering for his former empire. Some had their eyes on the valley again. "Why tell us?" Amara asked suspiciously. Snake Eyes shifted uncomfortably. "I did you folks wrong. Can't undo it. But maybe I can balance the scales a bit. Besides," he looked at Amara with something like respect, "any woman who can face down Hawthorne while carrying a child deserves fair warning." After he left, Luke and Amara discussed his information with the association. They decided to strengthen their legal protections, filing proper deeds and establishing the valley as an official township with elected officials. Luke was nominated for mayor but declined. "I'm a rancher, not a politician. Besides, I'll have my hands full soon enough." Instead, they elected Tom Patterson, with James Chen as sheriff when Carter decided to retire. The town they created was unique for its time, a place where people were judged by their character rather than their color or origin. The first snow was falling when Amara's labor began. Luke rode hard for Dr. Mills, while Eleanor Patterson and Mary Kowalski stayed with Amara. The hours that followed were the longest of Luke's life. "First babies take their time, Doctor," Mills assured him as Luke paced outside. "She's strong, and the women with her know what they're doing." Just after dawn, a cry pierced the air, the most beautiful sound Luke had ever heard. Eleanor emerged, beaming. "You have a daughter, Luke. Healthy and perfect." Luke rushed in to find Amara propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle. The baby had Amara's delicate features and Luke's blue eyes, with skin the color of cream coffee and a head of dark curls. "Our miracle," Amara whispered as Luke sat carefully beside them. "She's beautiful." Luke breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand. "What should we call her?" "Hope," Amara said firmly. "Hope Morrison, because that's what she represents." As the sun broke fully over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and pink, their friends began arriving, the cabin filled with quiet congratulations and gifts for the baby. Sheriff Chen brought a silver dollar for prosperity. The Kowalskis provided warm clothes they'd made. The Schmidts offered a hand-carved toy horse. Each gift represented acceptance, community, and hope for the future. Even some unexpected visitors came, Mrs. Henderson from the general store appeared with a beautiful baby quilt, mumbling something about times changing before hurrying away. Several townspeople who'd been neutral or hostile before seemed to soften at the sight of the innocent child. That evening, as their friends departed and peace settled over the cabin, Luke and Amara sat by the fire with baby Hope sleeping between them. "Remember what I said at our wedding?" Luke murmured. "Cowboy lost a bet, forced to wed a black beauty. But maybe the game's not done yet." "I remember," Amara said, smiling at the memory of that difficult day. "I was wrong," Luke continued. "The game is done, and we won everything that matters. Love, family, community. And now, our daughter. I couldn't have imagined any of this that night in the saloon." "Neither could I," Amara admitted. "When Blackwood forced this marriage, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." Hope stirred in her sleep, making small sounds that had both parents instantly alert. But she settled again, safe and warm between them. "What kind of world will she grow up in?" Amara wondered aloud. "A better one than we did," Luke said confidently. "Oh, there'll still be challenges. People who judge her for her mixed heritage. But look at what we've built here. She'll grow up surrounded by people who've learned to see beyond color and prejudice, and she'll have parents who'll teach her to stand tall and fight for what's right, and to love freely," Amara added, without letting others' opinions matter more than her heart. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in pristine white, but inside the Morrison cabin, warmth and love prevailed. What had begun as a drunken wager had transformed into something neither Luke nor Amara could have imagined. A true partnership, a loving family, and a community that proved change was possible. As they prepared for bed, carefully placing Hope in the beautiful cradle Wilhelm Schmidt had made, Luke pulled Amara close. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to take a chance on a foolish cowboy. For showing me what real strength looks like. For our daughter. For everything." Amara turned in his arms, her eyes bright with tears and love. "We saved each other. Luke Morrison, and now we have a lifetime to keep doing it." They stood together at the window, watching the snow fall on their land they'd fought for, bled for, and won, in the cradle. Hope slept peacefully, the living symbol of their love's triumph over hatred and fear. The cowboy had indeed lost a bet, but in losing, he had won more than he ever dreamed possible, and the forced bride had found not just a husband, but a partner, a protector, and the love of her life. Their story would be told for generations, a tale of how love conquered prejudice, how courage defeated oppression, and how two unlikely souls created a legacy of hope in the harsh but beautiful Wyoming territory. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Luke and Amara's journey from a forced marriage to true love. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales. And share your thoughts about Luke and Amara's story. Did their love touch your heart as much as it touched mine? Let me know in the comments.